Jeannie and Beck for another conscious conversation. It's been a couple of months since our last one because I've been away travelling in the States doing some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
And
I've been here, moving house, coming to a place of just feeling like we're ready to reconnect and speak again.
That's right.
To you guys.
For those of you who are not quite sure where we are, we're actually in Perth in Western Australia, which is a really interesting place to be. It's got a lot of ancient history here, it's got a lot of really ancient land formations, but we do sometimes feel like we're separated from the rest of the world. We seem to have our own kind of energetic ecosystem here that is quite different to everywhere else. I particularly noticed that when I came back from travelling.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, you sort of come back and you go, wow, this is different, and I think the opportunity in different is to bring through some different perspective.
Yeah, I have noticed too with Perth, it's almost like a bit of a greenhouse effect here. I noticed that whatever themes are happening here throughout clients coming during the week, themes that are brought up in terms of issues or perspectives people are having seem to be really reflective of what's happening in the world at large. We seem to have our own little microcosm of what's happening in the macro here. And so, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, some of the themes that have really been coming up in the last week have been about people feeling hopeless. And there's been a lot of themes around suicide, a lot of themes around depression, people giving up. What's the use? So I can only assume that this is really happening at a global scale at the moment. So it might be good to offer some insight into how people are feeling around that and what that's all about.
Yeah. And I know personally for me in the last few weeks I've been really sort of asking some questions of grief, and it's been really profound. And I lost my mum last year, and obviously an anniversary arrives, and it's really interesting for me because grief has been a theme in different times of my life. But it's only really with the loss of mum that I started really looking at it differently. And I started asking the question, what if grief was a friend? What would it look like? And the reason that eventuated, because what for me I find is sometimes I just wake up and I feel irritated, I feel annoyed, and I realise that for the last few days I've just been feeling out of sorts. And when that has happened, when I've really actually gone, oh my God, grief is here. And my perspective was that I was shown then that it creeps up and it encircles. And for me, that experience was feeling numb, not feeling connected, and just feeling really quite isolated. And so when I started actually asking the question, well, what is grief? And the way I work is rather than trying to get rid of stuff, I now realise that I actually embrace it and bring it in. It actually is able to reveal so much more. So I started talking to grief as a friend and saying, okay friend, what have you got to? And I started getting shown that what if grief is a really pivotal part, because ironically we all experience it. From a child, usually loss of a pet, and having worked in palliative care and oncology as a nurse, I used to always say that I felt that animals were often here on this planet to start teaching us about grief, because generally as a child you would lose a pet, and that's often your first experience of grief. And then I started getting shown that even as a soul, when we're choosing to incarnate, that what if grief was the first emotion that we actually experienced when we knew that we were going to incarnate and forget that we were loved.
So I guess what you're saying here is, in your perspective, what you're seeing as grief is goes hand in hand with unity.
Yeah.
So you've got the duality experience, which grief is the emotional experience of that. But it has to sit alongside unity, because really what we're understanding on the planet at this time is it's not a case of having one or the other, but we're actually having experiences now where they're sort of existing simultaneously. And I think that's why I'm seeing a lot of people at the moment who are experiencing grief, but also have a very deep understanding of their unity selves.
Yeah.
and also have a very deep understanding of collective consciousness on the planet, and of uniting with others, and of knowing that there's more than themselves as an individual identity.
Absolutely, because if you think about it, that's always been the way, but then perhaps we're just actually looking at it differently because, you know, grief generates people coming around you. So you feel that often people, you get a sense of how important you are to other people when you're grieving, because people want to support you, even though they often feel uncomfortable. And some people actually, when someone's grieving, actually are unable to cope.
Well, actually, I think the human instinct when you're grieving is to isolate and be alone. And yet usually what the experience is a precursor to is collective unity.
Yeah, yeah.
I do feel that we're on the planet at this time to actually experience both comfortably.
Yeah.
And I know that I've read many great teachings from those who are aware of their unity consciousness, who are quite happy to grieve.
Yeah.
They're happy to grieve alongside others because they're not grieving for something. They're just happy to actually sit in the experience of grief as an aspect of unity.
Yeah. And I think, you know, from my perspective and what's been coming for me in the last few weeks is that grief is what actually breaks us open. And so, you know, we go through life and we put on all these coats of expectation and of what we should do and who we should do it for and why we're doing it. And ultimately, these coats are what we're here to take off. And grief arrives and it creates a sense of brokenness and a crack in that armour. And every time we experience grief, is this an opportunity to actually be more of our authentic self? And from my own personal experience, the more grief that I have actually experienced gave me almost a more desire to live a more authentic, truthful life. And what if that was what grief role was? And, you know, I started getting shown, like, even the word grief, if you turn it around, it actually is fear, F-E-I-R, however, phonetically, fear, fear of grief or fear of God. And for generations and eons, we have been driven by this fear-based culture. Fear of God or the gods, that if we don't create sacrifice, if we don't do this, we're going to have famine and drama within our communities. And now we're arriving at a place in a society where we fear death and we fear people that are grieving because we might upset them or we might, you know, we don't know what to say. And I think if we, as we're becoming more comfortable with our emotions, you know, grief really brings a gift. And I think we were talking before about changing perspective. What if we started changing the perspective of grief? That grief was our gift rather than our enemy. And ironically, when someone is actually passing over and returning to, depending on your belief system, into their remembrance of all that they are, into their true magnificence, what do they leave behind but grief? So what if we start going, what is the gift of grief? And to me, I think it is that opportunity to live an authentic life. And, you know, maybe we could just say, what do you think an authentic life looks like, Beck?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, I was like, that was just thrown in there, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know what an authentic life looks like to me.
Yeah.
I'm in discovery of that. I think an authentic life is not something that is known. I think it's something that's discovered in every moment.
Exactly. And I think obviously it's different for everyone. But if I had to answer that question, I think, well, to me it's about being authentic in what you say, what you think and what you do, and that they all are in alignment. And so I think it comes back to that sense that we know when we don't feel balanced in an area. We know when this is great, this is great, this is great, but that's not great. So I suppose to me an authentic life is when we feel there's something out of balance, that we can then go and dialogue with that areas and ask the questions of that imbalance. In how do we experience this to make ourselves feel comfortable, and whether that be just making it okay that it feels out of balance, rather than having to try and change it. I don't know. But I think it's asking the questions and the perspective coming from a place that, okay, if this is a gift, what is it going to reveal to me?
I think I'm quite comfortable that authenticity is the great unknown. Because I think that makes life an adventure.
Yeah.
I think that then every day is an opportunity to find out what authentic is. It's an opportunity to play. It's an opportunity to not follow the rules.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to express in different ways.
Yeah.
So that to me is the adventure.
Yeah.
I think if the authenticity was known for me, it would be like a recipe.
Yeah.
It would be like a methodology.
Yeah.
It'd be like every other structure in life.
And I think everybody's authenticity is different.
Of course.
Because we all have that unique desire to express in our own particular way. And I suppose for me, being authentic is being committed to allow that authenticity in my own unique flavour to be allowed to be seen.
And I think that's why grief is such a personal experience. I think grief is so different for everybody. Everybody grieves differently because there is authenticity in that. There is no recipe for grieving.
No.
And there's no methodology for coping with grief.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that there are certain forms of how to deal with grief, or there are certain prescribed coping mechanisms, because it is certainly different for everybody, because it's such an authentic experience. And authenticity means there is no structure or form or methodology to it. I always, whenever I think of grief, and you talk about grief being the precursor to an unfolding, or precursor to a greater version of yourself, I always think of that first introduction to the book, The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle, where he talks about how he was his greatest grief and greatest despair, and that was the precursor to the opening for him, and the precursor to discovering more. And I think it's having the courage to go through the doorway of grief, rather than try to resist it or cope with it or move away from it. I think that's the challenge for us.
Yeah.
I think it's diving right into it, because when you dive right into it, you're actually walking through the doorway to the opportunity that it's holding.
Yeah. And I think that's something that grows within you. It's something that you can't choose necessarily to do.
You can't.
It's sort of, it will arrive. And I think that's why we go through different times in our life where grief becomes a greater theme. And then we just open that doorway a little bit more until one day, you know, and it may not be in this incarnation, you know, we might not be ready to do it, and that's okay, but there will be at one point where an authentic life, whatever way that is for you, where you feel that you are ready to just open the doorway to shine your light. And I think then we hold a space for other people to shine theirs.
And really, you know, we think of the great natural bushfires that come through. We get a lot of those here in Perth. You know, people are frightened of them. They feel lost when they come, and terror, and all of those things. And yet, what those bushfires do is that they ignite regeneration, and they ignite new growth. They can't be controlled.
Yes. No.
We don't have a say over when they start and when they don't start.
No.
There's something greater there that wants to have a replenishment and wants to have a reset.
Yes.
And we see that the first season after a bushfire is magnificent for flowers and growth. And new wildlife comes in. It's just incredible.
And that's such a beautiful metaphor. And I know in my own life, when I changed my perspective about the challenges that came into my life, that's when they started revealing this, their jewels, and they became probably the richest part of my life. And sadly, you know, as a human, pain is really, really uncomfortable. And I think when we can make it okay for other people to sit in their pain and to be able to just be with people in their grief, because there's nothing that you can say is sometimes so encompassing and just so paralysing that as humans, you know, sometimes it's just the practical things that we can do for people, and you know, supporting them with a phone call or a meal dropped at the door, or real practical nature of being a good friend or a good neighbour. You know?
Or just being in your unity with them.
Yeah.
Because that's the coexistence of the dualistic experience and the unified experience side by side.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, especially, you know, with all the stuff going on the planet at the moment, there is a collective grief as well. So once again, as you said, you know, grief and unity are side by side. And I suppose, you know, we can just leave that question out there, is how do we want to dialogue with grief? How do we want to perceive it? And what if it is a gift? What does it have to bring?
Thanks, Jeannie. It's been a big week.
It has.
So thanks for listening in. We're hoping that some of the themes from today resonate with you as well. We're understanding that a lot of us are going through this at the moment in the collective experience. So we hope you'll tune in with us again for our next conscious conversation. Bye for now.
Bye for now.